So I'm curious, how much did you know about the opioid crisis before you came onto this project?
I had read a few articles that were these prominent articles. One in the New Yorker by Patrick Braden Keefe was kind of this big story that put the Sackler family on the national map. There was also a story in Esquire that came out right around the same time. So I'd read a couple of articles, but I wasn't by any means an expert on the subject matter. It was just something that I had been familiar with and pretty stunned by the basic facts of the case and of Purdue Pharma's actions.
I'd done a documentary, was part of a documentary in 2016 that Norman Lear produced for Epics, and my section was actually about the opioid crisis in Dayton, Ohio. So I had been on ride-alongs with the police. I'd hung out with in front of the methadone clinic and watched people toss baggies into the windows of people coming by to pick up their methadone to get them re-addicted. Families going to clinics to try to deal with children that were having trouble. And so I really, and I had a personal connection in my family with somebody that had an issue. And so I not only knew a lot about it, but it was probably one of the reasons I really wanted to do it, is I really, I don't know how many people watch this little documentary that I did or watch, there's obviously a lot more people watch something like this. And I liked that we were sticking to the facts, that it was a really deep exploration of it from every angle. And that it also just had such beautiful writing, that Danny really was just a guy who knew how to craft a narrative and write a scene.
Yeah, there were a lot of surprises as I was reading the script and Beth's book. And to Peter's point, I mean, he's a great writer of different characters and stuff, but his ability to just take so much information from so many different perspectives. I honestly think it's like the great kind of success in the show like this is Danny being able to kind of keep all these plates in the air at the same time and walk you through it linearly. Because it could be just an incredible amount of information and then also keep you invested on an emotional level. So coming in, I probably knew about as much as maybe anyone else, about the opioid crisis that is ongoing and that Sackler's and, that it was being overprescribed. It's highly addictive, but there was a lot of surprises, government's involvement and just the links the Purdue Pharma went to sow misinformation and mislead doctors and patients was kind of mind blowing.
Totally agree. I felt like, it had kind of been like a dull roar in the background for many years. I'm from North Carolina. And so you'd read the paper and it, just be this steady drumbeat. Oh, more mountain people are falling prey to opioid addiction. And I guess they just were fated to be drug addicts. And you realize that that's a narrative that was kind of created by Purdue Pharma and fed all the way down the line to sort of escape being brought to justice and to continue being able to sell the drug. Beth's book is a wonderful primer for anybody who's looking to educate themselves on a wide-ranging topic that's affected a ton of Americans.
Definitely. And Peter, your role is the attorney prosecuting the Purdue Pharma case. While filming, did you feel like you were able to tap into the investigative side of this case? And you mentioned that you have a personal relation as well. So wondering what the connection was there.
Oh, I have a relative that has suffered from a lot of this kind of addiction and been in and out of treatment. And, it's always an ongoing thing. Even when things are better, everybody's sort of holding their breath for when things get worse. So, I'm pretty intimately aware of what that journey is like. In terms of the investigative part, that's really what Danny was doing. And I'm actually not very good at holding stuff like that in my head. I mean, I think I'm good at intuiting things and knowing things that are difficult to describe in words, and that's why I act them out. But for me, the really beautiful part of this whole project was just how much space there was in between all of this information, that I wasn't, you know, with the exception of a time here or there, especially in court, you know, I wasn't always required to like spell out information. I say this like sometimes as an actor, you almost feel like you should turn into the camera instead of talking to your other actor and just tell the audience, you know. 1 in 10 Americans, but you know, whatever. So yeah, being an investigator, being a attorney, these are all things that go really well with acting, right? You're after something, you're pursuing something, there is a destination that you're headed to, and that's really gold for an actor.
And while the story is specifically about opioid addiction and painkillers, it does raise the question about trusting science. And already people in the comments of the trailer have kind of made the connection to COVID. Did the pandemic at all affect the way that you approach the story?
It didn't affect the way we approached the story. It did affect the way we shot the story, because we filmed it in the middle of a pandemic, pre-vaccine, COVID raging. It's pretty amazing that we were able to pull this off. I completely understand how this story could create skepticism and doubts and suspicion of the FDA, especially the facts of this case are extremely damning of the FDA. But I will say that I think the vaccine is a miracle in and of itself, and is, I think, completely safe. It's not just being used in the United States, it's being used by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. So I don't think that this story should make you think, well, every single thing the FDA does is corrupt or dishonest or incompetent. I don't believe that. I do believe in the case of OxyContin that there is corruption and influence in that the guy who approved the highly unusual label that pharma reps used to sell the drug as addictive when it was not addictive ends up going to work for Purdue Pharma within 18 months. And that this label was completely misleading, completely wrong. And it was one of the things that sparked the opioid crisis. What was the FDA label? So yes, certainly there's a lot to look at and be suspicious of, but that doesn't mean every single thing they do is a blanket of corruption.
Definitely. And last question, I read a previous article that mentioned that you kind of went into this project asking, how did this happen? Now that you've worked on the show, do you feel like you've gotten an answer?
Yeah, I do. I do think I understand how this happened. And it stems from the lies, deceit, manipulation of Purdue Pharma and the way that they were able to use their money and their influence to just bend the will of the government institutions that were there to oversee and protect us from companies like this, how they were able to be, legally manipulated, legally corrupted by them, is at its core, the story of what happened. It's not just the criminality of this company, but it was the failure of institutions that are there to protect us, in fact, became witting or unwitting co-conspirators with Purdue that were able to, instead of, oversee them, let them continue their deceptive practices. And in many cases, they'd go to work for Purdue, which is an example of why the revolving door, the swamp, can be so dangerous and detrimental.
I draw a distinction between opium derivative and a vaccine that has been created in a hurry to address a virus that's ripping its way through the entire world. I think, we talk about trusting science. I think there's also a distinction to be drawn between trusting science and trusting the regulating bodies who give the green light to a highly addictive substance like OxyContin and attach a label to it that says it's believed to be basically non-addictive. That is a failure of a regulating body. That's not a failure of the scientists who formulated the drug. it's also not a failure of the doctors who have prescribed the drug, because they've been pushed so hard by the drug company to sell the drug. And they can honestly say the FDA told us this drug was basically non-addictive.
And fed false information by the sales reps.
Mhm.
And last question, why do you think this specific case isn't more known?
I think, honestly, I gotta say, Daisy, that I think it is, but I think the problem is we suffer from an oversaturation of this story because it's been going on for so long with no satisfying closure.
Right.
So I hope that like by destigmatizing the people who suffer from addiction, that it hits home in a way that maybe it hasn't hit home prior.
Well, that's what this show is trying to rectify, isn't it? I mean, I think it's gotten some attention, and quite a bit of attention in the last few years in particular. But I think the facts of the case aren't nearly as famous as they should be. The specifics that are extremely damning are quite shocking. And one of the reasons why I was so motivated to make the show was so that people could see in a mass market medium scale exactly the crimes that company committed, that are pretty shocking crimes, especially in the sale of a very dangerous narcotic.